Whew, that was a week, wasn't it? Welcome to today's show. I am your host, Eric Darnley Small, and what a week. An incredible Make America Great Again week. And it is certainly not stopping. And we already knew that this was going to happen. And it's going to happen so much and so fast and so frequent that I wanted to start a new video series here. And I'm calling it Stick a Pin in It. And it's an ongoing series and roundup of what to remember going forward. Why is this important? Well, first of all, as everybody knows who've been here before, I always ask you to, if you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new content when it comes in. In addition, I'm going to read from some articles, and I am going to post those articles in my Mastodon. I encourage you to click on those links in the Mastodon so that you can read the articles for yourself and be educated. Don't take my word for it. But it's mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed. And you can also reach out to the show at the Mastodon. Reach out to me directly there. I have noticed some of the comments in my videos lately, particularly since the last video, that seems to really be about, we know this stuff is going on. What are we going to do? Just sit around and talk about it? Well, actually, yes, that is what we're going to do. And we're going to sit around and talk about it until we know what the problem is. I think that right now, the Democratic Party is in the wilderness. It doesn't know what to do. I think I reported last time that I didn't report this last time. I was going to talk about this today. It was an article, but I'm not going to reference it. But let me just say quickly that there's reporting that Chuck Schumer was basically yelled at by the governors, Democratic governors. Republicans are silent about the chaos that was caused by the executive order last week. But Democratic governors were pissed. And Chuck Schumer had to get into a conference with Democratic governors as well as his own people, because Democrats, which I've said before, are all over the map. There's two factions. There's a faction that wants to work with Donald Trump and the administration. We know Thomas Suozzi in the House, a New York Democrat, came out with a big op-ed before Donald Trump was even installed again as president, saying we want to work with him. We know Fetterman has become a very unfortunate figure for progressives, and he is looking to bend the knee and to begin to want to support Donald Trump and the administration. And what we're seeing from Democrats is a fracturing. And I think that there's a lot of reasons why. But to my major point, we have to figure out what's going on before we begin to implement any kind of a plan of attack. And we have to all be on the same page. The first rule of solving any problem is to first define what it is. And what I'm attempting to do with the Stick a Pin in It is to chart everything that Donald Trump did and said he would do, everything that we know a person like this, a fascist, a racist, a demagogue, a narcissist, what we already knew going into this during the campaign that I've been talking about and others, that we knew was a problem with the Republican Party and Donald Trump, that we're checking in now to see what is happening and were we right or were we wrong. So that's the purpose of Stick a Pin in It. And it's going to cover 5 sections: race and racism, as always, government performance / politics, the markets and the economy, not the same thing, but similar, the world and religious groups. And we're in a historic time. We're seeing an attempt to destroy America's government in real time. It's happening very fast, and we need to catalog it for the future and learn their tactics so that we can respond appropriately. Strategic response, as my father used to talk to me about. You want to respond strategically. You don't want to respond in any old way, any old fashion. Not even 2 weeks into his presidency, and planes crashed in Washington, D.C. Was it pilot error, mechanical error, DEI, or were traffic controllers and others rattled by Trump's memo attempting to fire government workers? If it was the latter, will they ever admit it? And is this the beginning of more tragedies to come? One of the most important things about the government aspect of this is that it's very difficult because some effects, like for instance, the tariffs, this is being recorded on Sunday, and beginning Tuesday, massive tariffs are going to hit Canada, and I believe they've already hit Mexico. How will we know when there's problems down the line where prices go up that it was the tariffs? Well, people are going to forget about tariffs, especially if their prices don't go up immediately. And we need to chart this so that we know exactly what it is, how we got here, and how this started. Donald Trump is going to blame Joe Biden. The Republican Party is going to blame Democrats. So we need to be able to have the proof to show exactly what happened here. It's important not only so that we can develop a response, but it's important for us to know. We are seeing a rise in blatant racism, which is instructive. My father used to say that racists use deny, defend, and distort when challenged with racism. Will we see that here? How will the black community, include Black MAGA, react when they or their family and friends see their good jobs gone? How are the American people going to take it? Not since the civil rights and Vietnam's movements have Americans truly come out against the nation. Will we see it again? How bad will it get? And a note about the difference between freedom/liberty and not freedom/liberty. Is freedom cheap eggs, a good job, and low interest loans and adherence to a dictator? Or is it high egg prices, a tough economy, 7 to 10% interest rate, and the ability to vote them out at the end of 4 years? That's one of the most fascinating things that I think that I really want to look at going forward. Because one of the things that authoritarians do, that dictators do, is that they are able to appease the masses. Saddam Hussein used to do this all the time. Bashar al-Assad used to do this. Erdogan does this in Turkey. And one of the things that they do is, as soon as the people start getting a little bit rebellious, they throw them some chum. They throw them a little bit of, let's have a little, give them a little extra money. Let's give them a little bit of extra freedom to run around and say crazy stuff. But it ain't lasting for long. And one of the things I'm very curious about going forward is, do the American people realize that a good life does not mean you're free? And I think that that's one of the things that, and by the way, I put good in quotes. Everyone has a different definition. But one of the things we've been hearing about the most during the campaign is the price of eggs, the price of food, inflation, yada, yada, yada. As if that meant that the country was doing well. That is not the definition of when the country is doing well. It is a byproduct of a healthy country, but it is not the definition of a healthy country. Definition of a healthy country is power and where power lies. Does the power rely in the people, or does power flow to the richest 1%, to the broligarchs, to the so-called well-connected and well-off, and the family of Donald Trump, right? This is the thing that we're facing that I think Americans have never seen before. Not even since the Civil War, nothing like this has ever happened to America. So it's a historic time. So on today's show, racism throughout the government, attempts to destroy the government, and overreach to authoritarian. This is within the first 2 weeks of the Trump administration. And let's begin with race. A lot of racism in just under 2 weeks. The Air Force, under DEI efforts, is told to stop teaching about the Tuskegee Airmen and WASP, then reverses itself. This was a very interesting story, and it's a fascinating story, in part because of how the administration responded to this thing. Okay. And this is from CBS News. This was on the 27th of January, last week. And it says lesson plans that include videos of the Tuskegee Airmen, groundbreaking black pilots known for their service during World War II, and the Women Air Force Service Pilots, or WASPs, the female World War II pilots who were vital in ferrying warplanes for the military, have been temporarily removed from the U.S. Air Force curriculum, U.S. Air Force official says. The lesson plan for basic training that have to do to diversity are under review to determine if they comply with the EO from President Trump that aims to end diversity, equity, and inclusion programs within the government. An Air Force official told CBS immediate steps were taken to remove curriculum that is now under review to ensure compliance with the EO issued by the president. So, why is this necessary? Actually, let me first, before I go into that, let me immediately follow up on this. So, the administration was immediately told because they recklessly sent out this memo talking about DEI. And apparently, even though they're not racist, according to Black MAGA, apparently, according to them, anything with blacks in it is DEI. Whether it's good blacks, bad blacks, whatever, somebody must think that DEI means black people. Gee, I wonder why that is, Black MAGA. Anyway, the Air Force reversed itself. And this is an article, this is from the BBC. The U.S. Air Force will continue to teach about the first black pilots known as Tuskegee Airmen in basic training, following a review about what to prohibit under President Trump's ban on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in the federal government. The U.S. military will also keep materials on women Air Force service pilots. Since he was sworn in last week, Trump has swiftly worked to wipe out DEI programs throughout the government, but his new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, said moving forward, materials on the Tuskegee Airmen will not stand. Removing materials will not stand. A group of around 1,000 black pilots and airmen flew hundreds of dangerous missions during World War II. So, despite what Pete Hegseth might say after being embarrassed to learn and the world to learn that DEI apparently means anything that talks about blacks, they have decided to reverse themselves on this. And it's curious, again, why they would even need to remove this stuff, right? According to black folks, black conservatives, Donald Trump is not a racist. The Republican Party isn't racist. Conservatism isn't racist. All they want is for history to be said, to be made true. All they want is to have meritocracy and all this stuff, right? Yet, as soon as they get in, immediately they don't wait. This began less than 2 weeks in. I think this was only a week and a half. Hegseth was only in his position for a day, maybe 2 days. And immediately they're burning books about blacks, having nothing to do with diversity, equity, inclusion, but having to do with the accuracy and accurate telling of history. So why? Why, you have to ask yourself. Another why, right? This actually has nothing to do with the federal government. This is on the state level. Indiana governor leaves state's predominantly black university out of budget proposal. This is from Black Enterprise, and this was in January 29th, a few days back. Indiana Governor Mike Braun has left the state's predominantly black institution out of his 2025-2027 budget proposal. Martin University has only received state funding for the past 2 years, despite being private university, while having benefited from the $5 million, especially amid enrollment woes that could now be in jeopardy under Indiana's GOP leadership. According to Insider Ed, Martin's omission is a continuation of Braun's anti-DEI priorities. Braun, a Republican, previously signed an EO banning funding towards DEI initiatives, including affirmative action in college administration. So again, this is instructive. DEI is code for anything black. Any universities that are black, any jobs that are black. Affirmative action is code for anything that helps black people, right? So that's racism. Unless you have, and people put in the comments and you can tell me, but unless you can explain in some other way that makes sense, there is no excuse and no other way to look at this. the anti-DEI movement that has permeated the Republican Party, not just Trump, but the Republican Party, and has been a part of conservatism going back to the 1960s, has always been a pro-racist movement. And they've used these euphemisms like states' rights in the back in the day, affirmative action in the back in the day, wokeism today, DEI today, as a target for black people and any resources that go specifically to blacks. So continuing on. Now, this one is a very interesting story because it picks off on what I talked about in my last video. Again, this is on the state level. This is not on a federal level. This is this is in Alabama. And I bring this up because it's instructive. Because on the last video, I talked about consent decrees. What is a consent decree? A consent decree is when the DOJ, the Department of Justice, goes to a local municipality within a state and finds, in this case, and consent decrees were used a great deal in the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. And they discover what they call pattern and practice of basically racism, of targeting black communities. Happens a lot, particularly in the South. And the Civil Rights Division was created to address all of the behaviors in the South that were targeted towards blacks, making their lives miserable. And we saw this very classically, as I talked about in my last video, Ferguson, Missouri, although Mike Brown was the big story in that. The story that people didn't talk about much was the consent decree that Ferguson, Missouri entered into with the DOJ under Eric Holder, which set about undoing the pattern and practice that was going on a state level where blacks were being targeted by white or by the city. A city that was predominantly ruled by white people. And the police were targeting blacks, and it resulted in, according to Holder, unbelievable segregation and separation and a difference between the treatment of white people and the treatment of blacks. So much so that the city was making money off of the mostly poor black community, while the whites, some were poor, but the majority of whites there were not in Ferguson, were treated completely differently, right? We then found the same thing happen after George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And once again, the Justice Department entered into a consent decree. And as I'd mentioned in my last video, the Justice Department under Trump twice, first with Ferguson and Jeff Sessions, and now here with Minnesota, has immediately started undoing consent decrees. And that is to free up the police department to continue their abuse against blacks. So where do we see this going on? What is going on why would I feel that blacks are being treated differently, particularly in southern states, but not totally in southern states, right? Minnesota is not a southern state. But why do we feel on a local level that blacks are being treated so much differently? Well, here's another example. Wouldn't you know? Multi-million-dollar lawsuit has been filed against Alabama City on behalf of a man whose attorneys say was tased by police officers while in handcuffs. The lawsuit filed against city reform officer Dana Elmore and Deputy Jody Elmore references a viral video that shows Micah Washington in tears after being tased by Dana Milbourne, WBMA reported. Officer Elmore approached Washington, Jacorian Henry, and Washington's brother, who was 16 years old at the time, with excessive force and deliberate indifference before wrongly detaining and arresting and prosecuting them. My clients are clear victims of police misconduct. According to the lawsuit, the men were changing a tire on December 2nd, 2023, on the shoulder of on the side of a road in Pickens County, not far from their aunt's house where they were headed. The men initially thought Dana Elmore was approaching them to help with the flat tire, but instead she angrily demanded to see their identification. While complying with Dana Elmore's request, Washington began recording the interaction on his phone in shock Then attorneys say Dana Elmore used her taser on Washington and demanded he get on the ground. In shock, Washington cried out, "I have never been shot before. Why do you have to have your feet on my back? I'm not even doing anything. We are out here changing a tire," Washington said as to Elmore while pleading for her to stop, according to the lawsuit. So, this is the value of a consent decree. Donald Trump's DOJ is not going to investigate what happened here. Anyone asked the DOJ to look at this police department, no way they're going to go about investigating if this is a pattern in practice with the Alabama City Police Department. But this is why you end up with consent decrees, because I bet your bottom dollar that this has happened before. And this knee in the back, where have we heard that before? Sounds like George Floyd to me. Down on the ground, face first in the ground, excessive force. This is how people are treated in these places. So I just wanted to highlight that, and I want to see if I can follow up on that story and keep looking at this to see where the lawsuit. This is a civil lawsuit. They're not doing anything in terms of trying to go after the police department. It would be futile. But that is an important thing to stick a pin in and look at how that goes, and how going forward, the police departments are going to be emboldened in state level when their treatment of blacks and other minority groups. Finally, I want to talk about this other story, again, having to do with race, but instead of with African Americans, this is Hispanic Americans. And this is from CBS. This was from January 30th. And this is about a South Florida man who says he is traumatized after being stopped twice in 2 weeks by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who demanded to see his identification despite being a U.S. citizen. This is something that people should be expecting going forward. They are going to start pulling over people based on the way they look. Racial profiling. Big time. So, anyway, the article goes, Carlos, who was born and raised in Hollywood and is of Colombian descent, believes he was racially profiled. The first incident occurred last week at a convenience store in southern Georgia, he said. He turned me around very aggressively and zip-tied me. Carlos recalled saying an agent then escorted him into the back of the store where other detainees were sitting on a sidewalk. He was eventually released. Then, on Wednesday, Carlos said it happened again, this time in Pembroke Pines, Florida. No doubt in my mind that if I was fair-skinned, blue-eyed, and blonde, that would not have happened. Immigration attorney who is involved in the case said law enforcement officers must have a valid reason to ask for identification. That sounds a lot like stop and frisk in New York. But the bottom line is that if you are an American citizen and you think that you're safe and you are a person of color, you are not safe. You are just as much in danger as everybody else. So, moving on. This is one that is extremely important as well. Important to look at and monitor. And that is the government mess that is about to happen. As I said, I think earlier, it's very hard to chart back as to the inefficiencies of government and when things go bad, what the cause is. Donald Trump will blame everyone but Donald Trump. We'll blame Biden, we'll blame the Democrats. Republicans will do whatever Donald Trump says. But we need to know what the world was like before Trump and after, so that we can tell whether this truly is a Trump issue or if this is something structural to government. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, Hegseth is not on the job 2 days, and already an incident in Washington, D.C. above Reagan Airport, a Black Hawk helicopter and a commercial airliner collided and killed all aboard, both the Black Hawk helicopter as well as the airliner. And while we're trying to figure out what happened, two things to put a pin in. First, air traffic controllers are being pressured to leave left and right less than 2 weeks into the new administration. According to a recent report as of yesterday, one airport lost all of its air traffic controllers. And that is a story. This is out of Fast Company, but it is being reported elsewhere as well. And it is basically that a Bay Area airport that is near San Francisco Airport, one of the largest and busiest airports, had all of their air traffic controllers walk off the job. And it says Silicon Valley Airport, that is on approach to San Francisco International Airport, will no longer have air traffic controllers guiding planes starting Saturday, the airport manager said on Wednesday. Current controllers for the San Carlos Airport have resigned after the FAA changed their air traffic contracts to a firm that would pay controllers significantly less than their current compensation, the notice states. Airport manager Gretchen Kelly said its request for temporary FAA staffing for the tower was declined. San Carlos Airport has more than 25 aviation-related businesses and around 500 aircrafts. The letter came just hours ahead of a deadly crash of a military helicopter with an American Airlines jet at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. So, what happens when you begin to dismantle government? What happens when you begin to frighten people? When you begin to make the people who are the administrative state, who are the folks who work for the government, who are fellow Americans, get scared, and you make sure that their job is in jeopardy, could be in jeopardy, that their lives could be in jeopardy, that their pensions and the promise of a good job with the federal government is made in jeopardy because a reckless EO has been sent around the government telling people to resign, and they're totally confused. What happens? What happens to FAA, FDA, USDA, all of those government agencies that are important for our everyday lives? What happens when people are shook like that, are shocked? Do they work more efficiently or do they work less efficiently? And when they work less efficiently, what does that do to us? And how does that make our lives worse? Other important thing, this is from Deadline White House on Thursday. Important little story, and I wanted to capture this segment from the show. This is Nicolle Wallace talking to her reporter about giving us a little bit of a timeline about what's been going on at the FAA since Trump got in, or even beforehand. Extremely egregious. This is it. Take a look. Take a listen.
On Hilliard, if there's information that Donald Trump has shared with journalists on background or otherwise that led him to be able to conclude that this was a result of politics and DEI programs from his predecessors?
Zero evidence that has been presented. And he himself, I think we need to be very, very clear, said himself there from the White House today that he didn't know himself whether this had anything to do with so-called DEI hiring initiatives. This from the president today, just 1 week after his inauguration, hours after more than 60 people were killed just 5 miles from the White House. He equated the tragedy and placed blame on non-white, non-disabled people. He suggested that a former Department of Transportation secretary was BS. He alluded to an FAA group inside the FAA that he was referring to that said that the FAA was too white, in his own words. He then made reference to people with disabilities. He made a reference to dwarfism, hiring practices of inclusivity that for more than a decade now, the FAA, including during his own first administration, sought to expand the reach of individuals that they brought into the FAA. And let's be clear, if we may, when we're talking about the FAA, there's been a chronic understaffing of air traffic controllers. And yet what we heard from the president today was not an acknowledgement about some basic issues that have been acknowledged here up on Capitol Hill and from previous administrations before, but instead he blamed DEI policies and hiring practices when still hours later he has presented no evidence and no specifics that would corroborate any suggestion that somehow any of the individuals that were involved in this crash or were air traffic controllers were somehow inappropriately hired or had inadequate experience or reason to be in the positions that they were, including 3 members of the military.
And just remind me, Trump's inaugurated on which date?
It was January 20th.
So our timeline of Trump's aviation actions as the President of the United States goes like this. On January 20th, the FAA director leaves the office under pressure. On January 21st, the air traffic controller hiring is frozen, so no more can be hired. And on January 22nd, the Aviation Safety Advisory Committee is disbanded. Does the White House have any comment about any of those actions?
No, we're still waiting for this point in time, and I think it's important to note that the pool camera actually just went into the Oval Office as the president was signing another executive order just literally in the last 15 minutes, and he was asked about those comments to clarify again his idea that DEI was responsible in part for the tragedy, and he said, well, it could be, again, not being definitive with it, but again, not pulling back, understanding the heartache that people are going through here, and again, him or the White House not providing any specifics that would suggest otherwise.
There is a Musk thread that I must pull with you, Von Hilliard, based on reporting from Reuters. I'll read you that reporting. Quote, Federal Aviation Administration Chief Mike Whitaker will step down when President-elect Donald Trump takes office next month. This is from December. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, a close advisor to Donald Trump, in September called for Whitaker's resignation and harshly criticized the FAA's decision to impose a $633,000 fine on SpaceX after the agency said the company violated launch license requirements. Elon Musk is the richest person in the world, I believe, and he had this person fired because of a $633,000 fine on SpaceX. Do Elon Musk or SpaceX have any public comments today on that?
Not that I have seen at this point in time here. I've been tracking that as well here. And on the point of Elon Musk, though, could I add this, though, Nicolle,
Please.
too, that I think when we're talking about individuals and allies of Donald Trump, I think that so many of the stories that we are looking at, including this one, come down to who is that nucleus around Donald Trump. And one other name that I would throw out there would be Charlie Kirk. And the reason I bring up Charlie Kirk is because 1 year ago, I, along with a few other NBC colleagues, reported a story in which Charlie Kirk, the right-wing provocateur and ally of Donald Trump, he had put out in the public sphere on a podcast that he was concerned when he got on airplanes when he saw a black pilot because he questioned whether they were hired because of DEI hiring initiatives and not because they were qualified. And at that time, there were some allies of Donald Trump's, including RNC Chairman Ronna McDaniel, who went directly to then candidate Donald Trump with that specific remark. And they wanted to make sure that Donald Trump heard that because they thought that he would not want Charlie Kirk around him because of that suggestion that somehow black pilots were not qualified to be flying in America. And instead, 1 year later, when I heard those remarks from the White House, it took me back to that story 1 year ago because instead of Donald Trump pushing Charlie Kirk away, he fundamentally embraced that very ideology that of questioning the aviation industry and the extent to which individuals are in it, whether they be pilots or air traffic controllers or even members of the military, because of DEI hiring initiatives.
How often does Charlie Kirk fly? Do you know? Does he have a job that requires a lot of plane travel?
He travels through his Turning Point organization that is a conservative activist organization.
I mean, he'd have to fly an awful lot because according to the FAA, 94% of all pilots in America are white. Do we know if he had a bad experience or a bumpy flight, or was it just simply rooted in racism?
I don't have an answer to that question other than he said that when he got onto a plane and he saw a black pilot, he said that he questioned for his safety and whether that individual was hired for DEI practices.
You'd have to take a whole lot of planes to even see a black pilot based on these statistics. I want to read you Pete Buttigieg's response, Von Hilliard. He wrote this about Trump's comments: despicable. As families grieve, Trump should be leading, not lying. We put safety first, drove down close calls, grew air traffic control, and had 0 commercial airline crash fatalities out of millions of flights on our watch. President Trump now oversees the military and the FAA. One of his first acts was to fire and suspend some of the key personnel who helped keep our skies safe. Time for the president to show actual leadership and explain what he will do to prevent this from happening again. Is there a sense that there is some culpability from the White House? Is that why they went out and attacked DEI and the Obama and Biden administrations?
And we should be
okay. That goes beyond really what I wanted to talk about here, but. Again, this is more example of it's the racism stupid. This is more example of this is not about economic anxiety. This is not about, the cost of eggs, the cost of bread, the cost of milk. This is about black people are getting jobs and are doing well. And we don't like that. We want to make sure that our guys get in. This is about power. This is about what we can do to tell ourselves that there's a problem with blacks getting successful. And remember, it's a double-edged sword. This is why African Americans in this country has struggled, because if you give jobs, good jobs, if you promote, if you hire, if you educate blacks, it has always been a problem with this country. Going back to the founding, we know slaves, if you were caught trying to teach a slave to read or a slave learned how to read, they were put to death practically. So it was a problem that a black person was educated. But if you are educating blacks, giving them good jobs, it's taking away from a white person somewhere along the line, and it is racism, or reverse racism was the term that they came up with back in the day. Reverse racism, right? They don't acknowledge racism, but they acknowledge that it's been reversed. So you have to figure the head-spinning logic on that. However, the reverse racism to them is worse than racism. So you can't get them good jobs and you can't teach them. However, if you provide government subsidies towards them, a welfare, housing assistance, health care, that's wrong, because they should get a job. So this is the conundrum, and this isn't Donald Trump. That Charlie Kirk incident, which is, again, a fascinating story. I have always said the problems are, in my view, go from the most responsible is the conservative movement, second, the Republican Party, and third, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is like the old hair club president. I'm not only a client, I'm not only the president, I'm also a client, right? Donald Trump gets his news from Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk tells him racism, and Donald Trump repeats the racism and enacts it. Does that mean Donald Trump is a racist? I don't know. But what it means to me is that what's more important is that you have racists around you. So DEI is just the recent thing. But also this is a story about what happens when government begins to fail. And government within a week and a half is beginning to fail. It's beginning to break down because of incompetence, because of attacks, because of people are being put in positions of power who don't know what they're doing. And the second story is also a clip from Deadline White House. And it's former FBI agent who details how FBI has moved outside of its charter to join ICE on missions to terrorize migrants. His important message is not only about the legality of what the FBI is doing is dubious, but also what are the crimes that are being committed right now that we won't know about for a year or years later that could have been prevented, but for the fact that the FBI is running around with ICE. How many serial killers, international or domestic terrorists, white-collar organizations or criminals, serial gang members, rapists, are not being investigated because FBI is spending its time joining ICE? And when will we learn about when we learn about this years later, will Trump blame himself or DEI and Biden? I bet you it will be DEI and Biden. So let's listen to this. This is Frank Figliuzzi on Deadline White House talking about this very issue.
Literally, as we speak, there are very senior people in senior positions in the FBI headquarters building who are being told to either resign or retire or accept a demotion. And I have to wonder if these Republican senators who seem to all be on board for Patel are going to regret their decision when they one day get sideways with the president and the president sicks Kash Patel and the FBI on them. The other thing that worries me greatly right now is mission creep at the FBI. As we speak, there are FBI agents on the streets with ICE and Border Patrol. And they're doing things that aren't anywhere near the FBI mission. And the problem with that is there are certain authorities that Border Patrol and ICE have that the FBI simply does not have. There are certain warrantless authorities that govern their work. And so already today, we're getting the FBI involved in things that are dangerous for them as an organization, and what's not getting done when they're out on the street rounding up migrants. That's where we are.
That's where we are. That's where we are. Frank Figliuzzi bringing it home for us. So let me bring it home and move on to the final thoughts on this. Racism. Why the attacks on DEI? Why do all of this so fast and quickly and so recklessly? It highlights the commitment of the administration to define anything that is non-white and male as the enemy. This is the cause of racism. We're seeing it in real time. I've never seen it like this before in my lifetime. I think many people haven't as well. The racist must do this. It is imperative that he do what he's doing right now. He or she knows that they cannot fight anti-racism, aka diversity, unless they seize the levels of power and rewrite history books so that the racist narrative is told. Part of power is the ability to control the narrative on history. Who writes history has the power. And that's why Tuskegee Airmen had to be removed and WASPs needed to be removed and books were burned years ago in Republican states. And I didn't even read the story about Hegseth not celebrating Juneteenth or Black History Month. They don't even want to do anything about it. Reportedly, Hegseth says diversity is not our strength. Why? Because diversity is anti-racism. That's why they're going after it. Because if you learn too much about the history of white supremacy in America, you may be compelled to do something about it. So they can't have that. They can't talk about Tulsa Massacre. They can't talk about all of the different times that the government has come out and destroyed blacks just as they were getting on their feet, Reconstruction, etc. So the racist has to do this. This is why this is happening so fast. Stephen Miller and others, Hegseth, they have to do this. You have to realize that this is something that is a part of their worldview. They're compelled to do this. Because if they continue or if they fail in doing this, their entire purpose for existence is disrupted. The government mess. This is one to watch very closely. The American people have no idea what government does. Most people have no idea what government does. We know RFK doesn't even know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. I didn't even know until fairly recently. The government has been demonized by conservatives since Ronald Reagan said the 9 most terrifying words were, "I am from the government and I am here to help." But the government is the people. And when the government fails, America fails. We need to chart Donald Trump's work here. We can't let his destructive government be rabbit-holed like the quote-unquote streamlining of the pandemic response team in 2018, just before the world's greatest pandemic. I've talked about that before. People don't even remember it. I don't know of anybody who has spent any time talking about it, long periods of time. But I believe strongly that hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved if we had gotten to COVID sooner. And George W. Bush and then later Barack Obama created a government program that would chart and prepare and respond to the next pandemic that they knew were coming. And Donald Trump, early in his administration in 2018, went in and dismantled that. Now, I will put in a Reuters article in my Mastodon where there is some confusion. Even John Bolton believes, oh, well, it was never eliminated. It was just streamlined. Well, maybe, this is, again, double talk, because if your streamlining makes it less efficient so that when COVID hit the world, that streamlining made it neutered it so it wasn't able to do its job, then you did destroy it. You did ultimately eliminate it. I think they instead of it being its own organization, they fired a bunch of people and put it a part of NSC, I think is the reporting. But the bottom line is that you did destroy this program that could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. We would have had respirators, possibly. We would have had masks, possibly. We would have had hand sanitizer because we would have been able to respond. And then the last part of this is the most dangerous. This is where things get real, and that's overreach. Mission creep, as Figliuzzi talks about it. But when our top government law enforcement agency goes outside its charter to serve Trump, we're in deep trouble. That is where I think all the people who study authoritarians say things really, the crap hits the fan. Because now FBI is no longer doing what it is supposed to do. It is now doing what Trump wants it to do. And today it's migrants, tomorrow it's me and you. Thank you for watching today's show. You will see me on the next video. Take care, everyone. Hey there, fantastic viewers. Eric Darnley Small here, and I hope you're loving today's episode of What You Missed. You've reached the end of today's show, but don't worry, there's more show coming up. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the bell so that you'll be notified when more content is available. You can also help the channel by clicking the like and subscribe buttons. It helps the YouTube algorithm find new viewers so that I can keep bringing you all this incredible content you enjoy. But wait, there are more ways to support the show. You can make a contribution through the show's PayPal, which goes a long way in helping produce even better content for you. And consider becoming a part of our growing community by joining our Mastodon site at mastodon.vtip.me/@whatyoumissed for more engaging discussions and exclusive updates. And here's something you won't want to miss. Mark your calendars for our live show streaming on YouTube and stream.vtip.me Monday mornings, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your support means the world to me, and together we're making What You Missed the best it can be. Thanks for being a part of my journey.